Okay, well, it's going to be my privilege now to introduce, and most of you I think already know, Dr. Stephen Moore. First, I would start out by making it clear that none of this that's happening could have been happening except for his wisdom and foresight and the contribution he's made to enable this to move forward. Steve has talked many times about how his own family has been touched by sexual abuse, and he's taken something that has been a personal and family tragedy, decided to do something about it, and has started an effort here to take a public health approach to child sexual abuse, which I think is clearly the only way in the future we're going to make significant advances. We can legislate, we can punish, but we can't legislate or punish away these issues. I think if we do take the public health approach and still do reasonable criminal justice interventions where it's appropriate, that's what's going to move us forward. I could talk for hours about Steve. He's been a success, I think, in everything he's done. He's been a success as a doctor, a success as a businessman, certainly a success in terms of his family. But I guess what I'd most want to say is just what a privilege it has been to know you. You're just a really decent human being. You're just a wonderfully decent family. You've accomplished so much, and we're all very grateful. And it's just such a privilege to be able to introduce you here again today. Thank you.
Thank you. We're coming up to the end of the day, and before we kind of get into our prepared comments, I would just like to, of course, acknowledge Elizabeth and the work that your team has done. This is the 5th symposium that we've done, and you guys have done a great job. I very much appreciate all the speakers and all you guys. I'm going to clear a few notes off so I can make room for my pages here. And even though I printed it in 16 font, I still have to put my glasses on. So Julie and I are going to co-present this today. Thank you for allowing us to address the symposium today. My name is Steve Moore, and I'm an alumnus of the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. My wife Julie and I are the founding donors of the Moore Center. More importantly for today's discussion, however, is the fact that my grandfather was a pedophile, and as such sexually abused my 3 sisters when they were children, forever altering their lives and the life story of my family. Today marks the 5th annual symposium for the center, and therefore this is our 5th opportunity to speak with you about this issue here at Hopkins. Today we'd like to again tell our story and share several observations about the impact of child sexual abuse on families. Several years ago, by flipping channels, the news show 2020 came across my screen, The Power of the Media, right, David? And the show To Catch a Predator came on, and the premise of the show was that an adult decoy posing as a 13-year-old girl on the internet would invite men to her home under the guise of planning to have sex with them. The men would enter the home to be confronted by Stone Phillips, the host of the show, and then they were arrested. I watched in part fascination, like a train wreck, and part horror as man after man came into the home with the intent of having sex with a 13-year-old girl. Given our family experience with child sexual abuse, the program literally brought tears to my eyes, both for the child and the men who were uncontrollably destroying their lives. During the show, however, they interviewed a psychiatrist, a physician from Johns Hopkins, who had worked in the area of pedophilia, and his name was Fred Berlin. Fred, where did you go? I can't see you there, Fred. So Fred came on the screen. And Fred said something. He said, we need a prevention-based approach that would help prevent these events from ever occurring, an approach that would help the children and the men. The pieces began to come together for me, working with Johns Hopkins on the primary prevention of child sexual abuse. Shortly after that evening, my sister Kathy and her husband Steve Headley and my wife Julie and I contacted Ricky Fine, who's also here. Ricky, thank you. And Ricky was in the development office, and I knew Ricky from when I had been a chief resident here at the school. She was in the office then. And she arranged a trip for us to come to Baltimore and tell our story. So when we arrived in Baltimore, we did not know what to expect from the school. Child sexual abuse is a highly charged, emotional topic. And frankly, we just didn't know if Johns Hopkins would want to attach their brand to this topic. Child sexual abuse is probably the most challenging topic in our culture. And Hopkins is the premier institution in public health and the premier school. And we just didn't know if they'd be willing to put their brand and put this sign together. But we met with them, and Kathy told our story, and they agreed to do that. And we were surprised, and that started about 8 years ago. And I want to say also that Dean Mike Clegg, who was in transition, Mike will be leaving in his role as dean, but Mike always said the school never shied away from tough issues, and he was willing to take this on and willing to put his school's name on this issue. And again, we've been doing this for the last 5 years, and we're making a difference. I want to change course for a few moments and talk about several observations that I've made based on my family's experience with over the past 45 years of living with a family history of incest. First is, the truth is unknowable. And what I mean, in my family's case, we do know that my 3 sisters were harmed by my grandfather. There were specific events of abusive behavior in times and places that are fact. Because my parents found it so hard to believe that my grandfather could act so terribly towards his own family, and because as a family we were so unprepared to manage these issues, we stumbled. And because we stumbled, further harm was done. And I think that comes out in the movie. People can't believe this is happening in their own family. Like, my father couldn't believe his father would do this. And so these things don't get handled appropriately. And then as a result of the inappropriate handling, there's a lifetime of guilt and shame associated. So it's not an unheard of cycle. Those of you who work in this profession have seen this many times, and that certainly has been that experience in my family. So what is unknown and perhaps unknowable? In my family's case, a very important question is who else knew? This is consuming in my family, or should have known, and therefore should have protected my sisters. For example, did my grandmother know? Did my father's sisters, my aunt, my father's sister know? She grew up in the household with my grandfather. Was she abused? Did she know he was a pedophile? And if so, why didn't she speak up to help protect others? The circle of concerns widens. Who were others aware? Were others involved? We do not know, and we cannot know. But the uncertainty destroys trust and corrupts the relationships that are very fabric of a family. So why is this important? Why tell you this story again? Because I believe the search for the whole truth is not enough in trying to address the challenges of child sexual abuse. So much of what I see when these high-profile media cases come out is, what were the facts? What were the facts? And my point is that we'll never know. They're unknowable. And when we spend so much of our time and energy on only that part of it, we lose the opportunity to find opportunities for prevention, which could be so much more powerful. The second observation I want to discuss today is the realization that some injuries that occur in childhood cause harm throughout a person's lifetime. Or as I like to say, the injuries of childhood do not remain in childhood. I know this is stating the obvious. We see many examples of physical health where childhood injuries carry a lifelong impact. An extreme example of this might be an amputation due to injuries suffered in a car crash during childhood. In fact, my guess is that most of us have scars that last our lifetimes from injuries that occurred when we were children. So how does this translate into mental health scars? Again, using my family as an example, when something would happen that would cause these issues to come up in my family's dynamics, we would always go, and I think, again, this I think came up, why can't the girls just get over it? Why is this still an issue? I think you said somebody's mother said, it's been 11 months or however long it's been. How can this still be an issue? This happens to everyone. And that was our attitude. Why is this still an issue? It happened so long ago. We did not understand as a family that these injuries are lifelong and last into adulthood and beyond. So again, why is this important? Because these lifelong injuries create a societal impact that is far greater than we estimate. We talk about those who are direct victims of CSA being 1 in 4 females and 1 in 6 males. We know that child sexual abuse is a leading risk factor for a number of important common mental health problems such as chemical dependency and major depression. In fact, we believe that child sexual abuse is the leading cause of preventable mental illness in this country. But what about those of us who are indirectly impacted by child sexual abuse? What about me? What about my siblings and parents and others who struggle to understand and help manage the fallout of child sexual abuse injuries? What about the children of CSA survivors or spouses and partners who are trying to have healthy family relationships in an environment of mental illness? What about colleagues and friends whose lives and work are impacted by who are impacted? By preventing CSA, we could have tremendous positive impact in those directly and indirectly involved. My third observation is simply that some people can't be healed and some people can't be punished. When I was a second-year medical student, I was looking at a slide of lung cancer from my pathology class. What struck me was the utter destruction and absence of normal lung tissue. In fact, the slide reminded me of pictures I had seen of Hiroshima after the atomic bomb, just utter destruction. That slide showing absolute destruction caused by a preventable condition, lung cancer due to smoking, helped spark my personal belief in prevention. The injuries done to my family by the experience of incest have been profound and lifelong. Yes, we've had therapy as family and as individuals, and yes, it has helped, but treatment cannot fully heal some injuries. My grandfather died in 1982, at the age of 82, from natural causes. We do not know why he was a pedophile. We do not know if he himself was a victim of child sexual abuse. That is, at this point, unknowable. We do know that he harmed many children, but we don't know how many. When asked why he had committed such acts against children, including his family, his response was, "God made me that way." He was never punished, although the criminal justice system plays an important role in responding to the epidemic. The nature of child sexual abuse, with its delayed reporting and often unknowable facts, makes the criminal justice system ineffective in many, many cases. And going to Ryan's Ryan there, prevention would have been much, much better for the experience my family has had. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Julia to read a passage for us.
The Moore Center is focused on the prevention of CSA. In my family, these events were not prevented, and as described above, the damages are wide, deep, and long-lasting. In my family, forgiveness has not occurred. The tensions remain in my family, and it's so heartbreaking as an adult son to see my 82-year-old parents so desperately seek forgiveness for injuries they were unable to prevent. We do not celebrate holidays together as a family, but we live with the hope of forgiveness. And now I'm going to read a passage about families, love, and forgiveness written by Carrie Egan, who's a hospice chaplain and a graduate of Harvard Divinity School. Her work has been featured on PBS and CNN. So this is by Carrie Egan, and I'm going to paraphrase it just a little bit to shorten it up a bit. It's called What People Talk About Before They Die. Today, I'm a hospice chaplain. I visit people who are dying in their homes, in hospitals, in nursing homes.
Can I just interject?
Yeah.
Our day job is we run nursing homes. And Julia was a hospice nurse, and so in fact we have lived some of these experiences.
Yeah, that sort of very much
makes it a little more poignant for us
resonated with us.
personally.
Yeah. I visit people who are dying in their homes, in hospitals, in nursing homes, and if you were to ask me the question, what do people who are sick and dying talk about with the chaplain, I, without hesitation or uncertainty, would give you the answer. Mostly, they talk about their families, about their mothers, their fathers, their sons and daughters. They talk about the love they felt and the love they gave. Often they talk about love they did not receive or the love that they did not know how to offer. The love they withheld or maybe never felt for ones they should have loved unconditionally. They talk about how they learned what love is and what it is not. And sometimes when they're actively dying, they reach their hands out to things I cannot see, and they call out to their parents, Mama, Daddy, Mother. What I did not understand when I was a student, and what I would say now, is that people talk to the chaplain about their families because that is how we talk about God. That is how we talk about the meaning of our lives. That's how we talk about the big spiritual questions of human existence. We don't live our lives in our heads, in theology and theories. We live our lives in our families. The families we are born into, the families we create, the families we make through the people that we choose as friends. This is where we create our lives. This is where we find meaning. This is where our purpose becomes clear. Family is where we first experience love and where we first give it. It's probably the first place we've been hurt by someone we love, and hopefully the place we learn that love can overcome even the most painful rejection. This crucible of love is where we start to ask those big spiritual questions and ultimately where they end. I've seen such expressions of love, a husband gently washing his wife's face, a daughter spooning pudding into the mouth of a mother, a woman who's not recognized her for years, a wife arranging the pillow under the head of her husband's body as she helps the undertaker lift him onto the stretcher. We don't learn the meaning of our lives by discussing it. It's not to be found in books or lecture halls or even churches, synagogues, and mosques. It's discovered through these actions of love. If God is love, and we believe that to be true, then we learn about God when we first learn about love. The first and usually the last classroom of love is the family. Sometimes that love is not only imperfect, it seems to be missing entirely. Monstrous things can happen in families. Too often, more often than I want to believe possible, patients tell me what it feels like when the person you love beats you or rapes you. They tell me what it feels like to know that you are utterly unwanted by your parents. They tell me what it feels like to be the target of someone's rage. They tell me what it feels like to know that you are abandoned, They tell me what it feels like to know that you abandoned your children or that your drinking destroyed your family, or that you failed to care for those who needed you. Even in those cases, I'm amazed by the strength of the human soul. People who did not know love in their families know that they should have been loved. They somehow know what was missing and what they deserved as children and adults. When the love is imperfect or a family is destructive, something else can be learned: forgiveness. The spiritual work of being human is learning how to love and how to forgive. We don't have to use words of theology to talk about God. People who are close to death almost never do. We should learn from those who are dying that the best way to teach our children about God is by loving each other wholly and forgiving each other fully, just as each of us longs to be loved and forgiven by our mothers, fathers, sons, and daughters. We were unable to prevent child sexual abuse in my family, and now we live with the lifelong injuries created by those events. Within my family, we have hope for forgiveness. We started the Moore Center 5 years ago with the hope that we could prevent these injuries from occurring to other children and to other families.
Just in conclusion, I just want to say thanks for allowing us to share our stories and observations. Just like to end with one last story that I've shared with you before, and that is my 82-year-old mother talks about when she was a child. She had friends and neighbors who developed polio, and in her generation, polio was very common and very, very feared for very good reasons. She's mentioned one of her school classmates who developed polio and whose parents placed a child's iron lung in the window so that child could see other children walking to school and wouldn't feel so alone. Here we are, approximately 70 years later, and we have virtually eradicated polio in the United States to the extent that our 14-year-old daughter has no fear of polio and no idea what an iron lung even is. That's what prevention and a public health approach can do. So our hope is that we can have the same impact on child sexual abuse, and that in time, children will be free to experience childhood without the experience of child sexual abuse and its lifelong attendant injuries. Thank you.